Maybe I just start like 2 phrases in French and then we start. Alors, le fait qu'on soit ici à Marseille, pour ceux qui ont vu maintenant le film Four Waters, Deep Implicancy, oh my god, Implicancy, c'est neurologie, c'est pas facile. Is of course, c'est bien évidemment aussi très spécial et très approprié de l'avoir ici à Marseille, parce qu'on est au bord de la Méditerranée. La Méditerranée est quand même la première mer cimetière, si on peut dire, dans le monde. Donc c'est la route des réfugiés. Donc dans ce sens. Et c'est aussi le point de départ que Arjuna et Denise, Ferreira Silva ont pris comme point de départ. This is my first question, the part of the pointer. So you, if I might say, you took the refugee crisis and let's say the environmental crisis, the Anthropocene, as the start of the pointer to question how through writing and the media of film that you kind of also reinvented to my extent to approach it and to find maybe like new approaches and to use this crisis as something positive, as you mentioned, as your earthquake. Maybe you can just start, like, how did you start, and then we go bit by bit into different approaches of the elements, the knowledge of Western thinking, etc.
Also, just to say thank you to Toman and Cora and Siska and Sigrid. The film is the first of a series of films with my collaborator Denise Ferreira Silva. She's a philosopher based in Vancouver, but of Brazilian origin. And this is the second film we made together. I can't quite remember exactly how the film started, but I think we started with the elements and the decision to make a film. Not so much about the elements, but the elements in phase transition. So water turning into vapor, turning into ice, rain, this kind of permanent states of change. And we wanted to draw a parallel between migration, human migration, with transformation in the elements. And I guess to say that the camera, we use a drone and different cameras to move with the water cycle. So you have the point of view evaporating and raining down, going underwater, being caught on the waves. So I think water was our starting point.
So
also to answer your question about the migration, refugee, and the Anthropocene, I think a lot of our work looks at the history of racial violence, and of course the refugee crisis is the most current or most recent example of a long tradition of violence that you could say begins with Europe, begins with Western knowledge. And I think historically the kind of study of anti-blackness and racism and the Anthropocene have been quite separate. Environmental damage and questions of race have been kept within their own discourses. And something we're interested in is looking at the ways actually that those discourses intersect.
So yeah, this is exactly intersection, because when you're talking about maybe the construction, so you were looking at basically 4 waters are the Mediterranean, or the Atlantic, Pacific, and in the end, the
Indian Ocean, yeah. It started off as 3 waters, but then Denise wanted to do the Indian Ocean to add the 4th. And one of the central questions we ask is, what if knowledge didn't make this journey from Greece and Turkey up to Europe, Northern Europe? What if knowledge, like the beginning of knowledge, followed a different migration path from, say, Greece, Alexandria, to Australia? So this is a speculative question. What if we used a different migration path for the origins of the way we understand the world?
Yeah, this is the part of like looking at how to deconstruct, because it's like your work is like deconstructing and then giving a possibility that things can reconnect. And you use, if you take the 4 elements, what you've seen, and he was mentioning the Greek philosophy, Platon used for every element a geometric shape. It gave it shape. And maybe since you constructed the whole film on it, and our Western knowledge is based on it, which then you suggest that's where the split started between the mind and the body, but also between the human and nature. What we have today in the Anthropocene, our problem is we are not part, or we don't see ourselves as part of the biosphere. On the one hand, they are humans, and then there is, I point to Douglas' piece, yeah, it happened to be here. There's nature, but whereas, I mean, bit by bit, through your deconstruction and opening up the space for new knowledge, something else can come, and a new approach to knowledge, a new knowledge which is not only holistic, I mean, we go to this quantic, cosmic, can appear. So maybe let's start with the different shapes, and from Platon's, I mean, the Greek approach.
I think so. This problem of how to bring together questions of climate catastrophe, Anthropocene, environmental damage, with histories of racism. This was, as I said, this was one of our starting questions. And as we looked into the history of knowledge, of the way we know things, we saw a very distinct separation between the human and the natural world.
In the Western
Greek tradition, which comes through the Enlightenment and very much still determines the way we look at the world. And I think so much resource extraction and violence against the planet happens because we don't see ourselves as entangled, incorporated within, within our environment. We see our humans as somehow separate. And there's many instances across the history of philosophy and knowledge where this is restated. We say one of the first, there are many, points where this began. We say one of those points is with Plato, and he took the classical elements, earth, wind, water, and fire, and he gave them each one a geometric, abstract form. So earth is a cube, fire is a pyramid, and so on. And so we say this is one of those turning points in the history of European and Western knowledge that started to begin this separation of the human from the natural world. And the way that connects with race and slavery is that people who were not white were considered not human. And so they're part of they're on the side of nature, and white people or European white persons on the side of knowledge, and that separation plays out both in environmental destruction and in slavery and through to the refugee crisis today.
Since we maybe let's take the example also of water, because what's interesting also in your approach, of course, it's the macro and the micro. The water is, of course, in itself an element that has, you're talking also about memory. Water, as we know through science, I mean, that water has a memory and has a tremendous memory. So you had at one point, he was saying, geological, on the geological level, millions of years. On a human, we have like us around here. It depends if it's a human race or just we sitting here. So we know what
there's a difference in scale.
Different scale is. So nothing like, I think to take the example to start with water is incredible, because you were mentioning ecology, but also then this is linked through history and racism, that water has the memory of whatever happened in these oceans. So if it's the Mediterranean, it's not only about the last 10, 20 years, but it's thousands of years. I mean, you were saying it's You can find, even at one point we go into the cells, you can even find traces of slavery blood in water today. If you take water and you find these memories. So what did water make you, I mean, also physically you were saying, the camera is moving like this. What enabled the element maybe you to find this?
Well, I think the challenge is always how to we think in very human scale terms. 70 like this. So the person speaking in the film, he's the geology director of Haiti, and we interviewed him, and he was a very proper gentleman, and I was trying to ask whether geological time, or geological scales, and the human scales could interact. If we had memory or embodied memory that extends beyond our own 1 to 3 generations, and he was very stiff and said no. These two are completely incompatible, and I think that's an example of a frame of mind that is quite common, and that we're trying to work against, or to deconstruct, or to kind of intervene into a frame of mind that doesn't allow for human scales and geological scales, infinite scales like the infinite village, different scales and different concepts of time to be thought and felt. And we ask, if we can think and feel these different scales, what then becomes possible? Certainly we would treat the environment better. We would treat other people better. I don't know. There's a lot of speculation that can emerge once some of these rigid ways of thinking are let go of. And water, but not just water, but water in its phase transitioning helps us think not only in different time scales, but also different geographic scales. The oceans connect. It helps us move from one place to another. A normal documentary film might just take place in one location, but the water helps us sort of migrate and move around the planet. And then, of course, the way it cycles helps us, think about also.
Yeah, and also the micro and macrocosm. And another, I think, way to dive into a new way of knowledge understanding, that you took the earthquake in 1784 in Haiti, and that coincided, you frame it better, I just do it, with the revolution. And that these two moments happened because, there was the earthquake. That's very basically. So what impact has the environment especially in other cultures? When you say, like, there's the Greek approach, and then the human condition in other cultures was shaped by the environment. So even historical events, as the earthquake in Haiti had, like, the outbreak of the revolution.
Well, this is a little bit of
this
is a little bit of a counter history. I think that the typical way of understanding the Haitian Revolution is that they were inspired by the French Revolution. But another history is that this earthquake happened, a very large earthquake happened about 20 years before the revolution began. And during this earthquake, a lot of the slaves managed to escape and hide in the hills and in the landscape. And it was during this sort of exodus, this escape of the slaves, that they realized their power. The whole city of Port-au-Prince ground to a halt because it was mostly run by the slave community, and they were all hiding or escaped. And there was this counter history is that that's where they learned of their power and started to imagine a revolution from 20 years prior. So this is a kind of a counter history, and we like that the earthquake brings a certain kind of knowledge, not the knowledge of Enlightenment thought, but a knowledge of a kind of liquid earth knowledge, a knowledge that destabilizes the ground, that makes it shake, and also a knowledge that is continuous from the beginning of the formation of the planet. The planet is constantly molten and constantly changing. So it's a knowledge which you could would say is timeless as well as relatively formless.
Yeah, and then also the suggestion, I think, in your film, maybe you want to talk about it because it's not only visible, so to leave the visible spectrum to get in sonic. I mean, we have also a line kind of sonic here. To use this to have more of an effect of emotion, and to leave also, of course, our frame of time and space, and to dive into what you mentioned, of course, as well as the cosmic, as the quantic and then the cosmic, to open up a new way of connecting things, to leave the shapes and forms, to go into these phases. Maybe like also in terms of how you worked aesthetically with the film, the phrases, how did you...
I guess possibly that the body has knowledge of, this what we call like molten knowledge, this knowledge of lava. Perhaps the body is a bit less restricted when it comes to accessing these kinds of knowledge, especially because the Enlightenment was so focused on reason and thought and mental capacity. So we wanted to make a film that, while it speaks on the one register of the kind of philosophical register, it also communicates at a kind of embodied, effective level. And so the sound is one of those ways that it vibrates through different parts of your body. It kind of communicates on this embodied, we call it embodied program. To work on that level as well as the discuss.
Maybe also because we're talking about this, you take as an example the Polynesian way of sailing, that taking the body as a knowledge. They didn't have any technical it was of course the stars, but whatever was around, and also their stomach, or what he says, also the body. There were people only through oral transition, so bodily condition, that's a very good example. And to be able to read, of course, to know when the birds are coming, if they're coming, what birds usually do, certain kind of birds during the day, during the night, different season. If you are able to read all this, you could navigate and also, of course, be able to find islands and escape, hunger, so forth. So I thought this aspect also to taking this into account, these different knowledges, they're still existing. Obek, they're rediscovered, and the artists working with it, that we have finally, again, access to it. That we don't depend on our machines, that actually our memory and our body is able to work in a different way.
So the navigator, they're from the Marshall Islands, and earlier in the film you hear a woman who witnessed one of the nuclear tests there, and the consequences of the radiation arguably was using humans as case studies to test the effects of radiation on people.
It was the
white powder, and then in the boat this. And then later we hear Alson, who was one of the last navigators, and we wanted to talk to him about this Marshallese mode of navigation. We wanted to work with indigenous knowledge alongside scientific knowledge, alongside aesthetic knowledge, embodied knowledge, not to create a hierarchy, not to say one is better than the other, not to say the technological necessarily. It was important when working with indigenous knowledge not to enter into a kind of superstition. I think a lot of ways in which artists and whoever are working with indigenous folk is to look at their animism and look at their spirituality and believe very much in this as a kind of revolutionary mode. And I think that's, I'm not going to say much about that, but there's problems with that. We wanted to look at just a kind of scientific or observational practice, and the way they navigate is by reading the wave pattern and feeling it, but feeling it through balance, not through superstition. The way they read the wave patterns is you have an island and the currents, the waves crash against the island and they create patterns, and talented navigators can feel when they're on the ridge on the crest of a wave. They can feel that in the valley. So it's a observational, scientific type of knowledge, and it was important for us to work with that and not with superstition.
Nor romanticism.
Nor romance,
you were able
know.
to, because it often happened. Maybe when we would you like to ask any question in French or English to Arjuna, so we have more like an open discussion? Any comments? So maybe you have to see it again. You are totally absorbed. It was also for me. I have to say, it was wow.
We're going to play it a couple times in the space as well, so people can come by and see this another time if they would like. It's very intense, and I think that there are many different levels that are incredibly interesting and that are things that should be looked more into, and it gives us a nice starting point for the Infinite Village. I'd like to thank you for coming all the way from Berlin to share this with us, and I'd like to thank Sigrid Pawelke for having been so great and interviewing and talking to Arjuna about this, and thank you Linda Koimati for the sound. And does anybody have any questions?
Yeah.
I just wanted
your film has lots of echoes, serendipitously, of a project I'm working on at the moment, because everything is connected. And the project is based on a text that my mother was reading when I was floating in her amniotic liquid in her belly, a text by a Greek man. My mother's French, her father was Italian, her mother was Austrian, my grandparents were from elsewhere. My father's from Australia. He got on a boat for England in '69 and spent his whole life teaching English to political refugees. But the text, I won't tell you who it's by because of copyright, but I can give you an extract of. Are you all English speakers, or parlez le français ou l'anglais? Because I know off by heart in French, but not in English.
Do it in French and then read it in English.
No, I don't like this.
That's okay.
I've got the support. It's better in French, but never mind. Nous venons de... No, it's English. We come from a dark abyss. We are heading to a dark abyss. And we call the luminous interval life. As soon as we are born, the return begins. At once the setting forth and the coming back. We die in every moment. This is why many have cried out, the goal of life is death. But as soon as we are born, we begin the struggle to create, to compose, to turn matter into life. We are born in every moment. Because of this, many have cried out, the goal of ephemeral life is immortality. In the temporary living organism, these two streams collide. The ascent toward composition, toward life, toward immortality, and the descent toward decomposition, toward matter, toward death. Both streams well up from the depths of primordial essence. Life startles us at first. It seems somewhat beyond the law, somewhat contrary to nature, somewhat like a transitory counteraction to the dark eternal fountains. But deeper down, we feel that life is itself without beginning and indestructible force of the universe. Otherwise, from where did that superhuman strength come which hurls us from the unborn to the born and gives us, plants, animals, humans, courage for the struggle? Both opposing forces are sacred. It is our duty, therefore, to grasp that vision which can embrace and harmonize these two enormous, timeless, and indestructible forces, chaotic, and with this vision to modulate our thinking and our action. Well, that's the introduction to my sound piece, which is actually in French, and I know it by heart, but I won't.
Thank you very much.
But I don't know, to me anyway, that was an echo of your film.
So you heard your mother was reading that while you were in the room.
Yeah, and I was learning French as a teenager because I was English and French when I just picked the book off a shelf at my grandmother's house and began to decipher it, to decrypt it, and learn it off by heart.
And then you asked your mom, and
she
told you.
And then years later, she said, "Yeah, I was reading that when you were floating around."
Yeah. It's super fascinating. Like one of the acoustic concepts that we were working with, carried over from the first film, was this called periacoustics. And we were thinking about how the unborn child hears, because this is a clear moment that all humans go through, where they're, more than one but less than two. This is a moment of high interconnection while in the womb. There's two brains, 1.5 body. I don't know. It's a complicated moment, but it's one that all mammals have been through. And we were imagining the acoustic experience, and hearing is the first sense that unborn child develops, and we were looking at it, both as this moment of identity formation, but the identity formation in this complex assemblage of multiple bodies, but also this kind of way of hearing that is internal. You hear through the resonance of the mother's spinal cord and stomach and all of that, and external. And so we play with this kind of duality acoustically a lot, this kind of multiple ways of hearing at the same time. One of the ways we do that in the film is we have a drone sky point of view, so we're up high, and then the acoustic space we used hydrophones to record the sound of fish in the Atlantic. So you have this kind of optical register somewhere up there and this acoustic register very close. And this kind of inside the body and far from the body, this kind of experience that we all go through was quite important. And the installation we made was sort of a bit like this as well. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Anybody else would like to? En français, je sais pas qui.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. And for the further discussions are going to be happening every weekend in the afternoons, and we're going to be having the open circle every Sunday at 3 o'clock in the Maison Montgrand, in the beautiful gardens over there, where we're going to create a big open circle, and everybody's welcome. So see you then, and for you developing.
Stay longer for informal discussions.
Of course, yes.
And discuss also other. The artists are around here.
Yes.
So sitting here. So it's yeah. I thank you very, very much, really, for this opportunity, because it's really an opportunity for us, since this work embedded so many approaches and questions that also different artists here address through their different media. So it gives us also, I think, a way to interconnect in a different way. And I think it's very important to show this kind of work also, political-wise in France, because the deconstruction of knowledge, deconstruction of history is very important in any space. But here, that you came to Marseille and France, it's urgent. Anyhow, so thank you very much, and we are looking, of course, forward to have the earth, the air, the fire. Yeah, amazing work. Thank you so much. Thank you.